Well, everybody, I'm Nancy Battick, and I don't pretend to be an expert on genealogy because, believe me, when you're in genealogy, you're always learning something new. Back in 1976, a man, that's in the dark ages, but a man wrote a book called Roots, Alex Haley, and the next year in 1977, it was this really hit miniseries. And what that did was take genealogy out of this small group of people who like to hang out with dead relatives to a vast audience that wanted to know about their ancestry. How do I go about finding my roots? Since then, we've got Ancestry.com, we've got the common testing for DNA, we've got Who Do You Think You Are, we've found Finding Your Roots, and more people are going into genealogy. It's one of the most popular hobbies there is, and that's great. Now, I always tell people who are starting their genealogy 2 warnings. The first one is, expect to find the unexpected in your family tree. No matter what people tell you, their ancestors weren't saints. They were just like us. They screwed up just as much as we did. And therefore, you can find some interesting things when you start researching your tree. You can find slave owners and bigamists and people who spent time in prison. And you can find, and this is a true story, the sea captain who had a family in Maine on the coast, and another wife and family in San Francisco, and another one in South America, all under a different name. And he was only caught when a descendant from the one in San Francisco came to Maine to research her seafaring captain ancestor and had a picture of him. Oh my, Grandpa was a rogue. You know, we like rascals, but don't start your DNA or your ancestral research if it would really upset you to find something bad back there. I was telling Kim over here, in the course of researching my ancestry, I think I have the ultimate horror story. I uncovered, you all know The Silence of the Lamb? Hannibal Lecter. He was based on a real person named Albert Fish in New York City. Well, guess whose family tree Albert Fish is in? He's a 3rd cousin several times removed, doggone it. And I always, it did sort of set me back. It really did. When I found that out, it was like, well, okay, I'm a historian, I'm a genealogist, I can deal with this. I know they weren't all saints, but my God, really? And he actually was executed at Sing Sing. Okay, well, that's my illustrious tree. But then I have people who came on the Mayflower, so they probably balance each other out. The sad thing is, we don't get to pick our ancestors any more than we get to pick our family. So that's one story. Another horror story that I have happened to a volunteer at the Maine State Archives. And he told me the story of a lady who came in. She had wanted to know about her great-grandfather. And her grandmother wouldn't talk about the man, wouldn't say anything about him. So she did a little research. She wasn't a genealogist, but she did a little, found him living in a place called Thomaston, Maine, with a whole bunch of other guys. That's right, he's in Maine State Prison. When they broke that to her, her first question was, what did he do? That's what you don't ask if you can't deal with what you're going to find. And the volunteer said, well, we have the records. He said, if you come back in an hour, I'll go and find them. Well, he did. And when she came, he said, are you really sure you want to know about this? Yes, I want to know about this. I do. I want to know. Great-grandpa was in prison for molesting his young daughter, her grandmother, over a period of years, which is why Grandma wouldn't talk about it. And the woman dissolved into tears. She sobbed. She ran out of the archives. And the volunteer told me, he said, I told my boss, I will never look up another prison record for anybody. You'll have to do it. I won't do it. Now, those are two really bad stories. Sometimes you find amusing stories, but the other thing that can happen when you have your DNA done is what it will reveal. Half siblings you didn't know about, that the man who you thought was your father is not your biological father, or in some cases, that your parents weren't your parents. And there are a lot of family secrets out there that have been hidden for a long time, because at one point this kind of thing was a big disgrace. It was a scandal. Today we kind of take these things rolling. I mean, if you spend any time reading about celebrities, you know there's nothing in your family tree that's going to be quite as bad as some of those guys. But in any event, if you do go into genealogy, if you have your DNA done, be prepared. Don't ask a question if you can't deal with the answer. You probably won't have Albert Fish in your tree, so you're one up on me. Okay. Genealogy is kind of like detective work, so you need your deerstalker cap and you need your magnifying glass, and we're going to follow the trail. Where do you start? You start with yourself. You're ground zero. And there are some handouts coming your way. They will show you how to record what you find on what's called a pedigree chart and a family group sheet. Now, first thing you do is gather everything you know about your family. Any paper trail you have, however small, can provide clues. So you want to look for things like school records, letters, diaries, photos, military records, whatever, postcards, greeting cards. Sometimes people communicated in a family once a year with a Christmas card, and they'd write a long note, and they'd be talking about Uncle Henry, and we just had a little girl, and you may have looked at that card in the past and not really realized that that's giving you all sorts of clues, especially if it mentions we moved to Concord. Well, that's in New Hampshire, or it's in Massachusetts, and you thought the family was always in northern Maine all this time. So I once uncovered a whole line in a family with one picture of a woman I didn't recognize, and on the back was written, Cousin Annie in New Hampshire. Well, who was Cousin Annie? I didn't know, and my mother was dead, and so I went on I really did put a deerstalker cap on, and it took a lot of research, but I identified a whole family line in New Hampshire I didn't know about. Once you've got all this, go over it carefully. Your second step will be to talk to any relatives you have, any family members who are living, and you want to talk to them about what they know about the family, what they were told about the family, what they remember. It's always good to record it if they'll agree to that, but if not, take a lot of notes and make a note of it. Now, I'm not going to disparage your great Aunt Fanny. I'm sure she's a wonderful lady, and she probably has a lot of family stories, but family stories need to be taken with a lot of salt, because people get things wrong. Memories get scrambled up in people's minds, and some things are hidden. Great Aunt Fanny may be passing on a lot of great things to you, but some of those may not be true, and that may not be her fault. But also, the human mind can play a lot of tricks. Let me tell you just one from my own tree. I live in the farmhouse that my grandparents had, maternal grandparents, my parents had, and there's one room we call Aunt Jenny's room, because Great Aunt Jenny, my grandmother's aunt, boarded there for some time. And there was a little wood stove connected to the chimney. And my Uncle William always told the story how he carried armloads of wood up the stairs to Great Aunt Jenny. And Aunt Jenny would always give him a little mint. He remembered that because the family was poor and the kids never saw candy except at Christmas. Okay. It was a wonderful story. It's charming. And then along comes the spoilsport genealogist who had to go and research. Okay, my Uncle William was born December 21st, 1923. Great Aunt Jenny died May 18th, 1924. He was 5 months old. There's no way that he carried wood, and indeed, she didn't die in my farmhouse. She was visiting another niece at the time and died there. My uncle was shocked when I told him this. I had the death certificate. I had his birth certificate. And his wife, my aunt, kindly said, well, William, I don't think you hauled any wood at that age, and enjoying everything about it. He had told that story for years. He believed it. He remembered doing it. Well, where did he get that idea? From his older brother, who was 6 years old, and he carried the wood up the stairs, told the story. My Uncle William listened to it, incorporated it, and the next thing you know, it's in his memory bank. These kinds of things can happen. It takes a genealogist to disprove it all, blow it out. All right, I'm keeping track on this. You'll keep me on time. Okay. So when you talk to these family members and you get those, they are offering clues. The story was right, the person was wrong. And you'll often find that's the case. Now, they're not graven in stone. They only offer you clues. All right. Now, when you start your genealogy, and people groan when I say this, you need to be organized. If you're not organized, you're just going to have heaps, piles, boxes. And I'm actually dealing with that as I'm trying to settle my late husband's estate. He, God love him, did a lot of genealogical research. And he kept file folders, he kept binders, he kept loose stacks, he kept boxes marked with the same names. And I'm suddenly dealing with thousands of pieces of paper. I, on the other hand, am a little more organized in that my files on certain family members are kept together. If you don't do that, if you don't start, if you don't discipline yourself at the beginning, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be hunting. You're going to have to redo research because you've lost it. And so that's what some of this paper is about. Now, if you already have genealogical software, you just make your entries into the software and it organizes for you. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money. There are forms here that you can take, and you can do it on paper. You can fill it out on paper. You can fill out what you found and how the family line goes. And as long as you keep them in file folders, or you can use binders, you can use color-coded file folders, whatever way it works for you, as long as you keep it together, then you'll be able to find it. And you'll be able, the other thing you need to do is cite your sources. Wherever you find a record, make a notation so that if 5 years from now, you'll say, oh, I'll remember I found that at the library here in Dover-Foxcroft. 5 years from now, you aren't going to remember where you found it. And you're not going to remember the author. You're not going to remember, was it in a book? Was it in a magazine? Did I find it online? Was it in Great Aunt Jenny's story about the family? So you need to come up with a system. If you're using software, it'll have its own system for you to enter. If you're not using software, you can create your own, but make sure you know what kind of source it was, where you found it, if it's written by an author, who the author was, the date of publication, and if it's an edition. You want to note that because sometimes these books on genealogy come out in different editions and they revise them over time as they find that something in the first book was wrong. So if you found marriage records in book A, but over here is book C, and you're talking to a cousin and a cousin says, oh no, that's wrong, it's this. You can look and make sure where you got it from and compare it against where your cousin got it from. The odds are the third edition is going to be correct and your edition is wrong. So you want to do that. And all right. So what kind of records are you looking for? In genealogy, we like to use primary records as the gold standard. And primary records simply means these are official documents, like a birth record, marriage record, death record. Or we like to deal with eyewitness accounts carefully. If you find an entry in Martha Ballard's diary, everybody know who she was, the midwife's tale, right? By the way, she's also in my family tree too. Martha Ballard delivered babies and she wrote it down. And she got it right because she delivered the baby. And often she was working in areas where there weren't any organized towns, there weren't town clerks. You got to remember, Maine was a wilderness for an awfully long time. And there were little settlements here and there, scattered. And especially at the time of the Revolution, there are no records. It's like upstate New York, we think of as a highly populated area. It was a wilderness at that time. And finding primary records or finding any records is a miracle. So, primary records are vital records. Vital, the British say, hatch, match, dispatch, birth, marriage, death. You're looking for those records. And I can tell you that can be hard to do. Here in Maine, starting in 1892, it was a law that these towns and cities had to send copies of these vital records to the state. But not all of them did. And all the towns were supposed to be recording these, and not all of them did. I know from my own research of a couple towns, communities, where they simply didn't do that. The clerks didn't do it. So vital records are great. What can you use instead? Well, church records, baptismal records are good, especially if an ancestor was Catholic. They kept pretty good records, and they'll also often have a death notice for a funeral, and they'll quite often have a marriage. They'll record the marriage, and you can actually get certified copies from if you can identify the church. So church records are great where they exist. There are other records that can help fill in. The U.S. Census was taken starting in 1790, and every 10 years there was a U.S. Census. Now, they didn't do this to help genealogists. That wasn't why they were taking the census. There were various reasons: political, financial, checking how many people were in agriculture. But you can still learn a lot. But how many of you have ever worked with a census? Okay, good. Then you know that prior to 1850, you only get the head of household's name. The rest of the people are little tick marks. That can still fill you in with a lot of information. Supposition that backs up another story. By 1850, they started putting the names of the individuals in the household into the census, but they didn't tell you how they were related. So if there's a son and a daughter-in-law and children living in the same household with parents, and maybe there's a cousin who's there for the census or a niece, it's not going to identify it. 1860 is when you started getting relationships spelled out. Yeah.
Problem I ran into.
Yes.
They actually misspelled my answer.
Yeah.
So everybody was bypassing it.
That happens a lot. The way the census worked, and also you will find people get left out of the census. How's that possible? Well, the census taker had a miniature form, and he was always a guy, went around door to door, sat down with whoever was there, and wrote down what they told him. Then when he got back to wherever he lived, or he had a clerk or his wife, take that material and enter it onto the official forms. So sometimes you'll have somebody missing. Sometimes you'll have a duplication, depending on when they took the census. I've got one set of kids who were recorded with their father in Newport, and then in the same census were recorded with their grandparents in Plymouth. That happens. And spelling errors are only as good as how keen on, remember, spelling was a suggestion for a long time here, and consequently a lot of names were spelled phonetically or the way they were pronounced. Like I have one ancestor whose name was Royal, but he shows up in every record as Ryle because they pronounced it Ryle. And that's on his tombstone too. But his real name was Royal. So you get these dialects, if you like, that will show up. And sometimes you will search and search, especially if you're using a place like Ancestry.com, and you're searching the censuses there, or Family Search, where you just can't find an ancestor. I've got a missing second great granddaddy, and I don't know where he was. I'm pretty sure he was right in Atkinson with the rest of the family, but he didn't get recorded in the census. And I know he was alive. And I tracked everywhere that man every relative he had to see if he was visiting, and he's just not in the census. But the census will give you the snapshot of what your family was doing. Now, for those of you who've watched Finding Your Roots and you've seen them tracking African Americans, you know, unless they were what was called free men of color, they are not in the census by name prior to 1860. They're simply listed on a plantation, and you'll get like a male slave, age, and a tick, and that's it. You won't get a name. It's very hard for African Americans to track their ancestry back further than after the Civil War. And it can be very hard for some of us if our ancestors took off for the Wild West and simply missed a census, or we don't know where they went. Global searching is good, but remember, those are usually done by machines, sometimes by people, but sometimes by machines. And that's only as good as your ability to read what's written in front of you, but it's also only as good as the census taker was in writing it. There are also state censuses out there, some county censuses, and some large cities. You run into things like city and town directories, and they can be a great help, especially if your ancestor lived in New York City or Boston. There will be probably annual censuses that were taken and show up as in-town reports, city reports, that will show where they lived and who was in the household and where they worked. This is all of great value to a genealogist. Unfortunately, when you're out in the boonies, you don't always find them. I think they did one for Dover and Foxcroft, and I think that was 1904. And my dad's family was here, and they never made it in. So that's what you run into. Okay, I'm having to move faster than I like. I'm doing okay? All right. Let's talk about this DNA for just a moment. You talked about finding Egyptian hits. Here's how it works. What's called autosomal DNA is the one that most people take. It's the one that shows a percentage of your ancestral hits. It goes back about, my understanding is about 500 years or so. And people will say, but I know that we had Scottish ancestors. I know we did, and I'm not showing any Scottish ancestry, no DNA. What happened? Was it a mistake? Well, no, not necessarily. When you do your DNA and you submit it, it goes into a database and it's compared against all the other people's DNA who are in the database. And right now, I think the largest one is Ancestry.com. They have the most people to compare your DNA against. And what can happen, this is how DNA works. Half of your DNA comes from your dad. Half of your DNA comes from your mom. They inherited from their parents, half from my dad and half from mom. And mom and dad inherited from theirs. Every generation, half the DNA gets left on the table. Now, if you have like 10 children in a family, they'll get the odds are they'll get a slightly different mixture of DNA, but there'll be enough to know that you had the same father, you had the same mother, you are full siblings or half siblings, but you won't get exact same mixture. So this is why, as I was telling Kim earlier, my 13th great-grandfather's on the Mayflower. 13th great-grandfathers. The odds of me having any of their DNA are absolutely minuscule because of all of those generations and all of the DNA. This is why sometimes people will say, but we do have Scottish ancestors. And you may indeed have Scottish ancestors. You just may not have their DNA. That's Nancy's really quick, simple, and easy definition of what happens with DNA. And that's why you can also get different hits if you're using different companies. If they have a smaller database, they may not have enough people in there that you match. When my husband took his first one with Ancestry, they were just starting out, and he knew where his ancestors came from. And he knew on his mother's family was German. He didn't get any hits in Germany. He got hits in Britain. And he was, you know, I don't have any British ancestry. I said, no, where did your ancestors come from in Germany? Well, they came from Saxony. Anybody ever hear of the Anglo-Saxons? That's why he was getting hits, because those particular British people had also carried down some DNA. So that's why you get that, Eric. That's why you get some of that. I'm going to give you another warning. It's very easy when you're doing your genealogy to get really excited. Oh boy, look what I found. I found my ancestor. Look, there he is. And look here in the book, it goes back way to Charlemagne. Oh, wow, wow. Except it may not be your ancestor. How many John Smiths do you think there are in New England? A lot. And I've got John Smith in my tree too. How many people are you going to find who have think about New York City in the Irish potato famine and Boston. How many people with the same names? How many Bridget Murphys were there? How many O'Reillys? How many, people who have the exact same name? And they come in, and it's very easy. I've done it myself. I spent months researching one family line only to discover wasn't my line. Binder full of documents. Really felt I had broken through a brick wall. Nope, I didn't. And so having done that, I always caution people, when it starts sounding iffy, when you find a 6-year-old girl giving birth, no, something's wrong. And I've heard people do wishful thinking. I want to be descended from the Earl of the chief of the Campbell clan. I want to be descended from I've got to be descended from the Earl because my name is Campbell. No. You may be a Campbell, and you're certainly eligible for a membership in Clan Campbell, That doesn't mean that you're a descendant of the Earl. And indeed, this poor lady wanted to start with the Earl and come down to her. And you can't do that. You have to start with yourself and go one generation at a time. And it can be a shocker. It can be hard, especially, as I said, if you've done months of research and discover you followed the wrong family. So try always to verify that the people you're looking at are really your family. And I'll give an example. Over there in what is now China, Maine, there was a brag line, and it's mine. And in the town records, there's 3 or 4 different Nathaniel Braggs. Well, and it says second, third, fourth. Oh, okay, well, that's father, son, no. What that means is the first one was either their first or was the oldest. The second one, junior, maybe, or number 2, is simply a person with the same name in the same town. And number 3 is the third person in that town with that name. Now you multiply this by like New York City. And you've got, as it turns out, it was the other Nathaniel was his son, and the third Nathaniel was a nephew. And then all of the brothers in the family named their sons Nathaniel and Nathan. Thanks, guys. These naming patterns can be really, really tough. And in some cases, it's almost impossible to break through. But do your best. Don't give up. So no matter how unique your family name is, there's bound to be another one. My dad's name was Anthony Klimavich, which is, sounds Polish, it was Lithuanian. And you'd think with a name like that, right? Except that he had an older cousin named Anthony Klimavich, and he also lived in this town. When the first Anthony died, there was 2 Mrs. Anthony Klimaviches. You don't know how much mail we got and had to go deliver afterwards that came to the wrong house. And then when I was doing research, I discovered a third Anthony out in Chicago area. So unless you've got a really unique name, like one Ciphorus Eliphalet with a long 30-letter surname, you probably are going to have to be careful when you start researching. And sometimes these unique names sound very, very similar. All right. I want to give you just one other clue here. When we're talking about towns, I have ancestors who came from Jones Plantation, Maine. Where is Jones Plantation, Maine? It's China. It's part of China, Maine. Town names changed. Town borders changed. County lines change. Provincial lines change. National borders go all over the place. So if you're searching diligently in one town, I had one lady get in touch with me because she was very upset. She couldn't find where her ancestors were buried. And she knew they had lived in Garland, and they weren't in Garland. And I asked her when, and she told me, and I said, have you looked in Sebec? Well, no, they didn't live in Sebec. I said, I know, but right across the line is a cemetery. And that's the closest cemetery to where your ancestors had a farm. And she was a little dubious. Later on, I got an email. Thank you so much. They were buried in Sebec. So when you're researching, you know, we tend to focus, they were here. Well, they moved around. A lot of our ancestors may have settled and they've got 10 generations in one place. But quite often our ancestors went from place to place to place to place. They were restless. A lot of them who came up here had to be because we were the wilderness. And they were striking out just like the people who headed west struck out into uncharted territory. So what that means is for your researching abilities. Expand your horizons. Always be open to the fact that, and do a little research. A little history helps. A little history really helps. And always know where you're going. Now, I have a few other recommendations. A lot of this is in your primer. I don't want to repeat what you're going to take home with you. I don't recommend anybody jumps into expensive subscriptions until they really know that they are going to stick with genealogy, because those can add up. Trust me, I know. This library has the library version of Ancestry.com. You can look up census records. You can look up certain vital records. You can get in touch with other genealogists. There are submitted trees, but always remember, somebody else put that out there. And in many cases, you don't know what they used for sources. Or they may have attached a source which is wrong. I found that when I found looking for a man named Fred Bragg, who was a little boy, 1 year old in 1880. There's no 1890 census. That's another fire. Fire is one of the biggest enemies of genealogical research. And I couldn't find him in 1900 at all. And someone posted online Fred Bragg's marriage license. And I thought, wow. And he was about the right age. And I thought, how did they identify him? And they had the first page of the marriage license. There he was, but not the second page. So when I went online, I flipped it. And when I flipped it, I found out he did not have the same parents at all. It was a totally different Fred Bragg. First of all, we've got a name error. And second of all, either wishful thinking or a little bit of carelessness on the part of the person who posted it. So always check the sources of the people. It's really nice when you find someone has made a breakthrough for you and they found what you've been looking for the last 15 years, only to find that, no, it isn't. It's not my family. It's not my family. And if they had looked, they'd know that this man is not the son of my great-grandparents. Okay, so always do that. Now, in addition to your library, and your local librarians are your best friend for finding stuff, there are larger libraries that have more extensive collections. The Maine State Library is one, although I understand they're having to lay off people due to budget cuts from the federal hacking that's going on. They're going to let 14 staff members go. And I don't know how that's going to impact, because they did have a full-time person who did genealogy. But they have an extensive collection. The state archives. These are open. These are free to use. And they'll often, if you have just one specific question, they'll often look it up for you and get back to you. They're pretty good about that. The other thing, of course, is the free edition of Ancestry.com. And you can also use, I think, 1 Billion Graves and some other at family history centers. And there's one in Bangor on Grandview Avenue. That's off Broadway. And here's another caveat. If you're going to make a trip to research, even if you've looked it up on the website, it says they're open, call. Make sure that's not the day that the heating system went out in the middle of winter, or the plumbing broke, or, all the volunteers came down with the flu at the same time. So always call to be sure before you travel any great distance to research. This is something I learned the hard way. I'm passing on to you all the stuff I learned the hard way. How we doing, Kim?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Also, in there's a list of sources in your primer, and one of them is a place called Cindy's List. Cindy's List is wonderful. You do have to state that you will not misuse the information that you might acquire by using Cindy's list. She's made it her lifetime work to keep track of all the genealogical resources on the internet. And it's free. She's not charging for it. Now, she doesn't guarantee all of them. She simply tells you what's there. So you need to be careful. You don't want to go in and spend a lot of money and find out that it really isn't worth it. If you are thinking about a subscription to a database like Ancestry or MyHeritage or American Ancestors, which is in Boston, that's the New England Historic Genealogical Society, call and ask them if they'll give you a free trial, or if they'll let you buy maybe a 1-month or a 2-month subscription, which is a lot cheaper than a year, especially if you're going with something like World of Locks, I can testify. That way you can, and don't do it at Christmas. Do it when you have time. Lock yourself in your room. Tell your spouse, I'll see you in 30 days. I'm not answering the phone. I'm not returning emails. I'm just going to research. And do it. And go on there and see. And if it really is just packed with what you need, then it's worth. And then ask if they will do like a senior discount, or if they have, see if they're having a sale. They often do, especially around holidays. They'll either knock something off, or they'll have an edition that's cheaper. So make life easier for yourself and your wallet. A lot of people will say, oh, I'm into this hobby, and they go and they spend a fortune. And so try to do it gradually. Now, if you're going to make the jump to researching overseas, I want to find out about my English ancestors, my Irish ancestors, my Italian ancestors, my German ancestors. The first thing to do is get everything you can get here. Every single record, no matter how small that little breadcrumb is, take the time and find it, because it'll help you locate where your ancestors came from. Now, if you're Irish, you need to know the county and the parish before you can find out much. What they can tell you, there's a history center in Dublin, and they can tell you, well, this particular county has a lot of people with that surname, but that doesn't tell you where in that county you came from. Or if you find out that you have what's called Ulster Scots. Ulster was a large province. It's now Northern Ireland, and it's been divided into 4 counties. There is no Ulster anymore. But if you run into that phrase, Ulster Scots, they were Presbyterian Scots who were either forcibly relocated or went on their own to what is now Northern Ireland. But if you're researching there, you really need to know as much as you can get here. That'll help open the doors. If you're researching in a country where you don't speak the language, or you don't read the language, you may have to pony up some money to get someone who does. And most national archives, and often town archives, will have a list of people who are qualified and can help you. A lot of people will just sort of show up on the doorstep and here I am, tell me who my ancestors are. It doesn't work that way. Always prepare yourself. And I would say the same thing if you're taking a trip out of state researching. Do as much as you can before you go. And if you're going to a place with a library or an archive, go online, take a look at what they've got in their collection, and be prepared. Don't waste your trip. The other thing to remember is, this is a shocker, everybody hold on, not everything's online. There are a lot of little historical societies and organizations out there that simply don't have the money for a web presence, or if they do, it's just their name. They don't have a listing. Some of these groups don't have the people or the funds to even create a catalog. But if your ancestors were in that town, you don't want to neglect that. Any more than you want to not look for local newspapers. And not all local newspapers are out on newspapers.com, which is a great resource. Bangor Daily News is on there. Piscataquis Observer is not.
It is free on our website.
And it's free on the Thompson Free Library website. Yeah, and you can research it. Historical Society, I know from experience, has a lot of unique documents there. But they're not scanned and they're not online. So, and sometimes you have to be very patient with small historical societies. Try and find that one person who knows everything about everybody in the town. That's the one you want to talk to, because she or he will probably be able to tell you about your family. And find out who lived near your family, because they may not have anything on the Jones family. Right next door is the Smith family, and they've got a ton of material from the Smith family. And what do you know? In those diaries, letters, notes, pictures, your ancestors may be sitting right there waiting for you to find them. Part of being a detective. So, let's see. I mentioned things like Social Security records, stuff like that, church records. Am I doing okay? Questions?
17, you're fine.
Yeah.
We had a question from
Oh, yes.
he asked, you ask how to access tribal records?
Well, that gets touchy. It's best done by talking to the tribal office and making a request for genealogical help. I know when I worked for years for the city of Old Town, and Penobscot Nation is there, and they had their own government and their own clerks and their own records. When the so-called Indian lands claim came about, a lot of people wanted to be proven to be members of the Penobscot tribe so they could get in on the money. And I'm sure some of them were just genuinely looking for the information. And it got to a point where they were very careful about what help they would give to people. I think those days are behind, and I think the best thing to do is whatever particular Native American tribe you're dealing with, to check online, find out the office, contact them, and see what they've got for records, and if they have a museum or a library or an archive, see how you can access it. You know, and of course, the large Western tribes, there are a lot of material. There's a lot of material on the Western tribes that were forced from Eastern U.S., but that can be a tricky one.
She also asked, do you have any advice when it comes to
Yeah, Canadian records are usually held in provincial archives. So, you know, if you're looking for a birth certificate from New Brunswick, there's a provincial New Brunswick online site with forms and information, and that's where you should start. And of course, their records will not be any better than ours when we were out in the wilderness, and they had wilderness areas, and itinerant preachers would go through and marry a couple and never bother to report it anywhere. Or maybe they didn't marry a couple. We you know, we don't know. But certainly, yeah, that's where you'd start, provincial archives. And check online with Family Search. They have a lot of information about researching in different areas, and they also have maps, and you can see how the provincial lines may have changed too. So depending on the date of what you're looking for, make sure you're in the right province. Remember, Piscataquis County didn't exist for a long time. There was no Piscataquis County. Other questions? Comments? Brickbats? No? Really?
No, I actually do.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how to word this, but there's sort of an etiquette involved when you find something out, say you're the one researching, and in terms of touching base and connecting with other people that you've learned something.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like an etiquette or a way to contact and not just cold call them or
I always believe in the old-fashioned letter, or note, or if wherever you found their name, they have an email address, sending them an email explaining who you are, what you're doing, who you're researching, and that you found them wherever you, and that it sounds like we're related, we may be cousins, or we have the same ancestor, and would you be willing to get in touch with me and we can talk about this? Yeah. Usually most genealogists want to share. That's, they just can't wait to share. There are some that won't. I've run into a few who, I did all this research myself, you can do it yourself. The other thing I've run into is a man who asked me how he blundered into a situation. He was trying to find out about his ancestors, and he got in touch with what he believed was his aunt, only to have her slam the door in his face because there was a family feud. And he didn't know about anything like that. He didn't know there was a problem. And he said, what do I do? And I said, well, here's what I advise. Send a note apologizing that you upset her. You didn't know that there was a problem in the family, and you certainly didn't want to aggravate the situation. And then ask her if she would be willing to meet and talk with you, and then leave it. Because sometimes that's the end. And sometimes people have an initial reaction and then they have a change of heart. So that's why I always advise making contact first. And by the way, if somebody helps you, a librarian, a town clerk, archivist, a volunteer, a small historical society, and they ask you, they do a lot of work for you, whether they find a lot or not, thank them. Send them a thank you. Make a small donation to the Historical Society. It doesn't have to be hundreds of dollars, but just a little bit that tells them you appreciate the work they did. Libraries also, I assume, would not turn away like a little, yeah, I mean, that kind of thing is important. It's always important. And who knows when you may need that person again. So if you leave a bad taste in their mouth, and believe me, I've dealt as a volunteer with some people who left a bad taste in my mouth, I would certainly never refuse to help them again, but then I wouldn't go the extra mile either because they were so nasty. Why can't you find that? Well, I can't find it because it isn't here. That sort of thing. Now, before we go, Kim, we've got some more handouts here. Yeah, there's, you can take some, these are pedigree charts from the National Genealogical Society. And if you're going to work with paper, they're handy to have. I've got a bunch, so you can have several each and you can photocopy. The other thing I have is a family group sheet where you record the members of a family. And if you have software, you can already do this with your software. If you don't have the software, you can keep the paper. This helps keep you organized. And it allows you to find things. Software is great. You also have in your handout a relationship chart. You may have heard people refuse to refer to things like, he's my third cousin 4 times removed. And that, a lot of people will say, well, what are they talking about? Well, it's just, this removed business is just how far apart you are from the common ancestor. My first cousin, once removed, is the son of my first cousin. That's because it's my grandparents and his great-grandparents. And you can carry this out as far as you want. If you have genealogical software, it does it all for you. But if you don't, with a little chart, you can figure out, and you can figure out what they're talking about when they say, I'm your second cousin twice removed. You're my what? And if you deal, yeah, it can be very confusing, especially when you start getting out 7th cousins, 9th cousins, that kind of thing. So that's all. Plus, I've got 2 samples here of a pedigree chart and a family group sheet. They're just from my family, but that shows you what they look like and what you can find. This is from software. And you'll notice there are some blanks. So no matter how long you've been researching, and I've been researching over 40 years now, you still have blanks in your tree. Any other questions? Eric?
On software.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm using, and I'm using it, it's Family Tree Maker. And the reason I'm using it is because when I first started, software was in its infancy. They had a program that was so complicated you had to be a PhD or a rocket scientist to operate it. Consequently, everybody was using paper. And then along came Family Tree Maker, and I tried it, I liked it. I put all my records in there. At this point in time, I now have over 100,000 records in my Family Tree Maker. I'm not going to switch, but there's Roots Magic, Legacy. I think Family Search has a freebie that you can use. And I would recommend, again, if you're thinking of software, a lot of people were scared because Family Tree Maker is based in Ukraine, but it also has an American branch. If you're thinking of software, see if they will let you do a little sample. Most of them will let you just download a sample, work with it. Is it easy to work with? Do I like this? Is it giving me what I want? If it isn't, don't pay for it. Try another one. And keep trying till you find something that you really like. And it's an individual. I know a lot of people who switched over to Roots Magic and love it. I tried it, and then I thought, I've got like 30,000 names in my database. I'm not going to make this switch. At the time, my husband was ill. I was caregiver, and I said, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with it. I'll stay with what I know. And hopefully that will not be a problem in years to come. So those are the, but also when you do buy, if you buy software, see if you can get a senior discount if you qualify, or see what you can work with them. I know Ancestry.com to buy, I believe, has a senior discount. But if you're using just the American version, start with the library. If you need to go overseas, you'll need the World Deluxe. And that's what I have. And that does run several $100s a year. So you really have to know that that's a hobby you're going to be into. It is, as I said, it starts as just a question, and then it becomes a hobby, and then it becomes an obsession. And then you're spending time with dead people. Yes. There you go. And that's a wonderful resource. If the entries were made at the time of each event, whoa, look at what you've got. I'd kill for something like that. If Great Aunt Fanny did it 250 years after the event, you're going to have to prove that Great Aunt Fanny got it right. We all loved it. I don't mean to beat up on Great Aunt Fanny. I'm sure she was a wonderful person. But you know, that salt, remember. Any other questions? Comments?
So I just real quick wanted to plug again our newspaper archive that we
Yes.
have on the
Yes.
website. We just raised $5,000, and we contributed a little bit more between the library and the historical society to rescan everything from 1 to 19. All of those years now should be fully searchable. So if you have ancestors or family or yourself, or you wanted to search for times that the place that you live now comes up, things like that, you should be able to search through all of those years of the Observer, and it's incredibly accurate. I'd say it's about 97, 98% accurate.
That's great.
It was about 5%.
Yeah, I know. I used it before.
It wasn't easy to search before.
No, it wasn't.
The images were really bad quality. These ones are great. So if you haven't tried it out, or if you did try it out in the past and were a little frustrated trying to look for people, all kinds of things are popping up.
You just put a name in, or address.
Yeah, it'll search for anything, and anytime that shows up in the newspaper, it should come up. People's piano recitals from when they were 5 and 6 were coming out. Everything I did in high school.
Uh-oh.
Depending on
Oh, yeah.
it might be good or bad.
What did I say about that? Things will show up and crop up. And do your descendants a favor. Record about yourself, your children, your grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. It's a tree. And we talk about collateral ancestry. That's all those people who get off the interstate highway, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins. But your children and your grandchildren, excuse me, may not be interested in genealogy, but somewhere down there's going to be a descendant who will be. And they will bless your name. They will bring flowers to your grave. They will say, "Oh, great Aunt Fanny, here we go again, was the best person in the universe. Look what she did for me." So don't just start.
Find it interesting though, if it does because this wasn't talked to a generation ago. What happened in the family?
That's true. Yeah, it's always wise to take a note of any diseases or any death, what causes, in case something runs in the family. That's very important. And if you don't know what it means, there are some sites online. If you can, I love Google. I don't have Google stock, so I can say this. Just Google for antique causes of death or something like that, and you'll get hits. And you can go on there and find out what the term is and what it actually means today. Like the shaking palsy is Parkinson's. Yeah, I had my great-grandfather and my second great-grandfather both had shaking palsy. And it's nice to know, especially if you start seeing things like breast cancer running in the family. Or in my case, colon cancer runs in the family. And heart disease. And this is the kind of thing that your doctors always ask. What did your parents die from? Is there a history of this in the family? So while you're doing all this research, be sure you note that. If they fell off a roof, well, that's probably, I still would note it, And if they were killed in a raid by Indians, which I have a few who were, well, I made a note of it. I've got it in the record. Might have lived to be 110, I don't know, but didn't make it. Anything else? Okay, well, as I said, I'm willing to stay around beyond this hour and try to help or answer any questions that any of you might have beyond what we talked about, because in an hour I can't teach you everything about genealogy. It's not humanly possible. I've done as best I can with the primer. You have my contact information. If you have a question specifically in the future or something, feel free to email me and just put in the subject line library genealogy class or something, so that I as I told Kim, I know that you're not telling me I missed jury duty and I have to immediately run out and buy gift cards, or I'm going to end up in federal prison, or you're selling me, siding or a new roof or whatever. Just so I know, because if there's no subject and I don't know your name, I'll look at it and say, I'm not going to go in. So just be sure. Any other comments? Anything? All right.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
You're welcome. And good luck with your research. Have fun.